Tange do je sha je re zon ro, jen je ma do du ja bon jan ba, su je lon ba da vre ji be. Sha je ja be ja dong ge jan za, do jen cha je de lo na ro da, ma ba ma la chi ja gam bo. Pa mo zhi ba je wan zhe gong ba, ga je la ma nan je da jian je, da nan de na zi ra dan je da, la ma la ba la ye ji zo za, la za yon de jam zheng a la ba. Tenri donjin ribe gele, zore da gelo, jizun rore zinja labdo zar, jia lamdon rore zinja labdo so, lan zhuwa zebra zinja labdo, zhuwa yi shi zinja war zinja labdo so, ganga danjan zhuwa njo, gaba me ba ji ba me ba da, me ba wa me ba zhuwa me ba da de do me, tunje me zhuba nye shi shi dem, Zubu zanje mananje damba de la janzar de Rinjen zaba la maji jago zondo jizilan dada doge julan bid doge dama dan sunje je don jajen bon jabar sunje la de zo Namka dang nyamba simjin tamji jidon de dinde lana mi bar yang daba zubu sanje je gombang rumbo jidobar sha Di chi da dambi ju gang ye sin de dong nyam su lamar ju nyam be samba chanchu ju de semji ba dang chu nyim be kun ju da gulong ma nar bu gun sim bar cha de la gang si bar sa ve chu ne jen ji ding sum jeng gong bo de ni kin ze be dam chu gong ba jik ba de re de la jer dor ji song ja da ngap ju den de chom de yo Dang tiyo de tene shardam dang lintab je yo bale ta yin sama gong de shu sin de ta lintab hiyo ka res de lintab de la dorju song yub ju shib du yo ba nang ke ta tene dreng tarpa cham tu nga hi yo jarong dan de shub kap sri Jonga ba. Juba. Dorji song juba. So. Injure chok na tre da ni. Tarpa chak tunga hiu jang rong.
Please cultivate a motivation. I'm thinking, may all sentient beings, limitless as space, attain a state of perfect, complete enlightenment. And for that purpose, I'm going to listen to the Dharma and then engage in practice. So cultivate bodhicitta, such an unmistaken motivation for listening to the Dharma. And the Dharma we are listening to is the Buddha's single intent by Lord Jikten Sumgön, consisting of 150 Vajra statements, 7 sections, oral instructions, and a supplement. And we are now at the last section, the supplement, which consists of 47 Vajra statements, and we are now on Vajra statement number 10, which says it is not contradictory that they have some elements conducive to liberation.
Tandela nde songo ya nde kharsang gang la tene namba mayin ba dang to soke tene namba mayin ba to soke tene chuni gi dim ba de chetawa yin to tu ga mare songarwa te junsen la tene yang yin ke gare kwa lin ro yore sena Tene che tasola che tarwanda tartok sanje che gompando tini tobya yo samare samya tra ko lendo yorwa te dablong swaina tene yonko yomare son tere na tasola tarba chamdong ge gewa yore sonre
And so that statement is in response to some people's claim that any kind of non-Buddhist traditions, some claim that non-Buddhist traditions do not have any elements or are not able to realize the ultimate truth of reality itself as it really is. And so they think that ultimate liberation, therefore, can also not be attained by them. And so that's what other people claim. And so Jikten Sumgön in response says that there are certain elements or there are certain virtuous practices present in non-Buddhist religions or traditions that are also conducive to liberation.
Oh yeah, dandala kazan kaun sumbana ye tawchani da deni da chuni gidin ba de to to yo mare song kan se jong song la rebe de ta keling go indu nambe deni tawa je nambe song ya ba ke tawa de to ba la be zu ma je na jo masana tel kan rebe chi yong to marwa yin yang da to so le yi zhe chane kam de hin yin bo yo ban de 다 남바 마인 바게 잠마제 바게지 감성 코와라네 신진 탐체 그줄라 데네 장이 미바 데네 데히니 보고 찹데 요르서 데 남바게 송거 요르 데인자 당보 저 산제게 감데히니 보요바 데제 데우자디 이츠그 타와 토바게 톱지가 마자로데 요차라와 다디 데네 디강라 다 저당 따라 남부 용롱니 히버게 데네 참튼 시반다 다도 솔라제 딤바데 무서 또바게 다 초문도 사고와 이나양 다 딤바데 또바라 타 녀버게 데네 수나만보지 요레 송용고 요레 주니게 딤바데 또바르세발라 타 녀버게 데네 수나만보지 유두 yang sunam korang sunang na yang che ta ngarang so zangin ro lamna de ge yume hambo de che nupa che chong ro tin de yo ro ba pen ngarang so namjun che chu nyam le ji de ya sunam che chong ka thoni ka koram ya yong go yo re pen na hirap ji bola cha ya wa na tambo tuzong ge hirap se 데니 투발라서 히랍데 야이 거리 데니 데아 공드 패런드 삼중 그 히랍시 데야 공드 패 데야 공드 패런드 데니 곰종 그 히랍선 다들 히랍 코랑 그 돌아야 사와 제바 조바 다바게 제바 요르바 데 다바톤다 수남라 데나 그 제바 요레스
So as you mentioned before, we have mentioned before that unless one creates the cause for realizing the Buddhist view, or the view of Dharmata, the reality itself, unless one creates the cause for realizing that, one cannot realize it. So we have said that we need to have a cause for that to be a result. So only if one creates the cause of making effort in realizing that the Buddhist view, only then will one also gain the result of such a realization. But also, all beings possess the same basis, which is Buddha nature. So also non-Buddhists, all sentient beings in the three realms of samsara have the same basis, the same mind. And that basis of Buddha nature, that is all pervasive, there's no difference in quality, not one is better or worse. So therefore, the Buddha also said that because beings have liberation, they have a Buddha nature, they have a basis for liberation. So they have this potential to attain liberation. And also in the various Buddhist scriptures, it is said that to realize the ultimate truth as it really is, that requires the accumulation of great merit beforehand. And it is that merit that brings one close to the realization of the ultimate truth of Dharmata. So any virtue that is also present in a non-Buddhist tradition can bring one therefore closer to the realization of Dharmata. And in terms of these accumulations of merit, one cannot judge them in terms of which one is better. But surely there is a difference in the strength of a certain kind of meritorious action. That is always mentioned in our different levels of practice when we practice the Dharma. Some certain practices then have a greater potential to accumulate merit. So for example, if we just think about this accumulation of wisdom, when we think about wisdom, there is the wisdom that arises from hearing, from learning, and then that increases, and then it becomes the wisdom that arises from reflection, then that increases, and then it becomes the wisdom that arises from meditation. And wisdom itself, the wisdom mind itself, is that the quality of the wisdom mind is that it is clear, it is vast, and it is all complete, all inclusive. And so in that regard, there's a difference in the terms of accumulating merit depending on the wisdom or lack of wisdom that one possesses.
다 대인도 되네 다 참튼 희반다 jirtang 코랑 무스 대답 많이 나야 든 대답 당 양나 디게 레버라고데 토발라 하장게 타니버 잘라 럽데와들라 찬튼바 또 휴거요레 대인도 참튼 희반다라 되네 감더 수남 참튼 되네 tarpa chamtuns ani ngimji chamtuns na chamtun number som ngimji so kare ngimji la de ta kam dala pena da che te chom la so pa pang so te chom pa ne chu ke dong chu je ge ne lo do ngimji de jin la on ta la go de
그냥 책들은 기억은 안 나네.
민지 센다 코랑 대첨에서 빵 대첨 빵데 언든 니 히바데 대첨 빵 언든 딘바오스 니데 바 메토는 동하 딘바오스 디니 지 센데 언든 동하 딘바오 센데 람지 딘바오스 팔로알로 요시 소라
단나티 대점에 받으려
대첨에 받으려 ni hidang ni ni side dan de metori sa han ta
ring ha korea ya chita ti nge chila
daran dere
nge ba chipo
ni ji chini yorera ji sina koran onde dunga din bawo de lamji din bawo de kunjong din bawo pa so le yewa chi song
ali yewa
ji sina yewa ra
ji sina yewa So this term conducive is that that even though it is not the actual thing, but it's coming close to it. So that means conducive. So one is coming very close to the actual view or the actual fruition. Even if it's not the actual view or the actual fruition, one's coming very close to it. And so in this context here, there are three kinds of kind of conduciveness, and that one is conducive merit, and one is conducive liberation, or conducive to liberation, and one is conducive to, it says this literal term, like having a certain division, such as, certainty arises from being free of doubt, and then there's like a certain division.
ya ta tin ang ga dambo sunam chamtun shiba da jedang dang khowa ga nami yi dong we chan da so la sunam chamtun series dang khowa la nami yi dong we cha kare re pe na Tori Yung Din Dun Se, Zog Zangwa, Rek Zangwa, Zog Zipa, Rek Zangwa, Tse Renwa, Ne Mi Ba, Deni Karwa Zangwa, Ta Chula Soba Tamjo Long Juba, Karwa Zangwa, Deni Nor Chupa, Ta Nor. Jopam Jan the Soche Gewala Kantonu to Korji Sosaya Jopan Joyo the Manda Kogoro. Then Chepar to in Shirap Chewas. Tanden Torik Yuntin Duns, the so Suna Chandun Kananda Yore.
So, things was going down. So then, conducive merit means that conducive merit refers to the 7 qualities of the higher realms. Which is a good fruition within samsara. So these 7 qualities are to have a beautiful appearance, to be of again a noble family, have a long life, be free from illness, have good fortune, and possess wealth and resources, which also are then used for virtue and accumulation of merit, and then also to possess great wisdom.
Yeah. Then the Hirab Chewa Hibanda Naranzo Soso Lasana Tamayana. Perna, ta pecha to some gon some big do pecha lomnir chigdo sana. Jerdankete Hirab Chimbo Chada Yorova. Yen a young daily Hirab Chesaji Yorobes na Yore, Garere or Samba. Two tsardu Samba Chigdo, Zetal Nyams Lindang Kanda Gondo, this was a tapje, Jin, Jegum Zotanoven, Tatana Tony, Samba Gondo, Sayanda, Yang Taki Gongni, Chula Lomnir Gondo, some Dele Jang Hirab Chirwa. Yang this Chula Tapje Chiala Soba him Jojian on the Soke, Hirab de Chihirves and Deamar, or Ta Gom Jagodos. Gom Jagon, those Samba Zamja Hirab the Chimbo Yimba Zamate, Gomus Jaya de Da could Jatan Hako, Ton Jandu, and the Hirab Haja Chimbo Chada Yorova. On that, the Tabayonga Lion, then is Suna Mamboching Mundo Masona, Lela Boyunkumada, Pernatahangan Stranka Cotonera, Sound Tangini. Gon Yang Taba Janki and the Haja Nyong. Janki they got to suit Tonton is Jatakoyamare. Pena Gom Jas and the Maha Jan Yong Changa Yore. O ta tele Pajatana che Pechala, Lomnier Tan Jones Jinkin Drama on Jorva. Ta Yang te Papa and Lomnier the Tusan Kayang Mizible Sound Tawan, Ta Kayang Mizinki Mount Jorva. That the two get in Kova Nana Dunhacher Mount Rodua. O the soul of Sound Dandu, could Hirap Chong Servante, Gandela. The number that go on Sebaina, or Sanjay Gompang to talk go, Sanjay Gompang about Sibala Joto, Gomja and Riha, some court of Goyora. This time not the court top metab Sevande. Same Trina and Sem Nan in Gune, Susuzola, J. Tan of Jin on the Gune that Sanjay Tangune Drin, the Tandal Betsun Jigo, some son of the hit, young Hirab the Yongo Yorova. The Hirab the Yung keep a young child, Yoro. There you be Jumsin Gary, then Koa Nea Jomang, Mambo drop, young Inland de Balayan Royal, Joy and Madura, then take a ray mother. Ginda Kang is a Keo Maro.
So, this great wisdom, when we think about just that, about in terms of our own wisdom, so, for example, one wants to study the scriptures. So that in general is said to be great wisdom. But then, what actually is great wisdom from that is mentioned here is that even though the wisdom that comes from learning or studying is a great wisdom, what is even greater than that wisdom is the wisdom that comes from reflecting. So where we analyze, we engage in analytical meditation and so on. So then the wisdom that is gained from that is greater than the wisdom gained from learning. And then, however, if we analyze the Dharma in this way, is that the highest wisdom? It's not the highest wisdom. It is that the highest wisdom is gained from the wisdom that comes from meditation. But then not just normal meditation, but actually knowing how to actually practice meditation. From that, the greatest wisdom is gained. And when we think about how many people actually have that or do that, it seems that it's not so easy. There are not so many actually who really practice meditation in an authentic way. There are really just very few. And even if they do, those few just do it for maybe short periods of time. There is many more who reflect, and then there is even more who study the scriptures. And then in comparison to those who study the scriptures, those who don't do anything at all are even more. So most people don't do anything at all. And that is why there is so much suffering in samsara. So with wisdom, one realizes, according to the Buddhist view, that I have to attain the state of enlightenment, and for that we need to create the causes. And the cause is to practice authentic meditation. So with wisdom, one is determined that this is what I really have to make an effort in. And there's very few who have such wisdom. Because in living in samsara, we create many causes of samsara, and we do not create many causes of attaining nirvana. And so therefore there is not so many.
Chirtang Kandar di Tupu Hirab, Sambi Hirab, Gombe Hirab said, Do Hirab Imbal Chikbari. Then Jikten Hirayuna Hirab Imbala Chikbari, Chepar Yongo Yomare. Hirab Imbala Chepar Yomaranda. Yena ya Hirab Korang la Nupa Chechong, Tsar Chechong Yore. Perna Karma Ku, Teni Daboku, Teni Nemoku, Somla Peyana, Teni Hakodwa. Detavako, who yimbala cheparmado, Karmako, Dabu, Nemo, Dawala, Yorida, and Maryland, around Nangolo, Yoruba, Kandar Nemaku in a Ricarena. The Koranzu yimbala cheparme by Jello Wool Chichondoa, de Daving around to Hirab yimbala cheparmena, Hirab Chichon Yore. Oh, that Gom Jagodan, Rosen, Dungene Janachi, draw Ayoba, Gom Jagging, Sang Simnala, Mune Gom Jagging. Sayando Sano de did I hear up Chemo, Hajang hear up Chemo, Yogodoa? De Mina, Dene Young took Wilmer. De my imbelega Lego de Lana, Dene Mang Lamsanchi in Chochono, Chago Yoro, Tandago. Tandaga Mambo Yoro, Bena Bena Sambake, Tony, Chukulomnia Generate. Tupaton Chukulomnia Jabanda Sola, that he gone Hibana Yiro. A tranga mountain boy, you debaji, Colela boy in Jim Sinjo Giro. Mare
Caralela.
that twister to ya and our Dantini, Lomnia Destian, so Gomja doing Lela Bo, Chadiro. Maranzo Lela Jano, the John Chagura.
And so we have this wisdom of listening, the wisdom from reflecting, and the wisdom of meditation. And in terms of being wisdom, the wisdom is one and the same thing. It's the same wisdom. Also in the world, there's a worldly wisdom which is the same. But what's not the same is the level of that wisdom, the power of that wisdom. It's just like luminosity. It has different kind of strengths. For example, there is the luminosity of the stars in the sky, the luminosity of the moon, the luminosity of the sun. So in terms of being luminous, they are all the same. It's the same luminosity. But in terms of level or strength, how strong it shines, there is a great difference. But in terms of light being light, there is no difference at all. And so similarly, there is no difference in the wisdom itself, but there's a difference in the strength and the power of this wisdom. So when wisdom is great, one feels very enthusiastic about I have to meditate, and one is determined to practice meditation. Otherwise, if one's wisdom is not so great, one will opt for the more easy thing to do. So the next easy thing would be to reflect, or the next easy thing would be to study the Dharma and so on. So that's easier. It's easier to study or to reflect on the Dharma than it is to practice really authentic meditation.
다 되네 대 순남 참전 휴신 말. 다 탈바 참전 희바데 지당 ngarazu che tarwa da tamchen chenba serendu tarba shiba de che ngondo la da mi gomban la go yore ina kanda la tarba shiba de yang hiwa nyang yin de ba la go yore go bo bang de sidu tene nde ngarazu cholam ge kap so tene da pena da cho sa ya le tamche ge wa hondu da mo dang che bar yong go yore wa che che ren wa hyo ne mi bar hyo serendu chen da la chong hong ro yore 나 산제지 공방 투표 세나게왕 누소 탈바참된 차데 요래서 탈바참된서 다고 냥일은데 봐라 되네 냥일은데 비교는 로샤샤라고 지당 되네 냥일은데 봐라 파 타니르 동킹게 드라케제 게와직 차도 요자 달라 탈바참된스 탈바이바데 냥일은데 봐라고 대단 참튼선데 땡무스 많이 나야다 대단 타니와다 대단 참튼 버잖니.
So that's the conducive merit, and then there's conducive to liberation. So normally liberation, this term liberation is understood in different ways. It could also mean to be liberated from lower realms, and so to take birth in the higher realms as gods and humans. But here, liberation refers to the state of nirvana. So, for example, in the context of the path of accumulation, we dedicate our merits that we have accumulated, and so there's a great difference as to toward what we are making our dedications. So we can dedicate, for example, so that we experience a long life, or we can dedicate toward the attainment of enlightenment. And so that dedication that is directed toward enlightenment is conducive toward liberation. So liberation here meaning it becomes a cause of attaining nirvana. It becomes a cause that makes one come closer to nirvana. So that is conducive to liberation. And so liberation here refers to nirvana, and conducive here means not necessarily being the actual thing, but coming closer to the actual thing.
Tene da ngimji chamten sen do banda chirtang karel shyoge yoresna da higang hibane ngi hibade nelong do je ha ko tel te chom do chu so anda ngi hibadong ri ji hibande pa yewa so so no sen wanda re perna dara jamban sinju nan kejik je ge zo sang je song de kejik je ge tola da sang je ro go yorwa kanda kejik je gang sang je de kejik je la sebra se song yang dan de kejik je ge tola 추담제 내로 하고 도한데 통랑을 때는 용거 요래 마도게 희내랑 그 돈데 용토고요 말에 희내 희반데 다다라 랑고 값 휴바나 희내 희반데 나랑 좀 미바 제질 반내 빠질 희월내 바세 거 요래 마이야 바텐 직팅 그 차당 몽선을 반데 소래 바 도네 미바 제질 반내도 희와스 란 통즈 라 시바데 희내지 값은 미바 제질네 되바 텔 라스 주바 지 하고 용거 요래 통희반데 하고 돈로 다 추담제 그 내롱 만리바 되니 하고 더 반데 차 용거 요래 다 내가 인자 Da per na cholam ku kapso chu timba nyawar yapa ta tola timba nyaya da je gom du ti gom de ya gom ro de tene ta gom korang ke chegin ra de ya lep char du ta ti kapso tene tarang arang so ta jolam se ba de langal lem chi chi yorwa ta lam de so slow lo yo mare te sam no de ko yo ju mare de lam se ba de ngarang so sem ka na lo yorwa nyam to a kon de per tang ka ton lam ze yoga yorwa tene jolam shibandala du se yore zemo se yore zuba se yore chumcho se yore es jolam ya ta kamsa ma do ngarang se tis langa ne ya ro go yore ta langa se ha go ji ke go ji yang kar chim bo ri do ma so sang je ge la go re te lam de so chu ni mo do sang je ndo sa yo ma ro wa
chimcho se na kare.
chumcho sen da ko koran ga cho chu ba de ra
So then the third conduciveness is the conducive to like a division of certainty. And so certainty means that one is free of doubts. One has gained certainty in the nature of mind, of how it is. So one has cut through all the doubts. And so division here refers to a certain instant. So kind of certainty in an instant. In the Manjushri Namasamgiti it says, in an instant you are enlightened. It is the matter of just one moment that you are enlightened. So when one sees the true nature of all phenomena, one has entered the path of seeing. So it is said that the practice of shamatha, calm abiding, only through that one will not see the true nature of all phenomena. And so on that path, one of calm abiding, the mind calms down into a tranquil state and abides single-pointedly in a peaceful state at ease. That is where all concepts of attachment, aversion, and ignorance have been pacified. And then vipassana, or higher insight, is that on the basis of single-pointed abiding, one then sees the nature of the mind as it is. And so in the path of accumulation, we practice meditation by practicing the mindfulness of phenomena, and then through habituation one reaches the limit of that meditation, the highest limit, and reaching that highest limit of the path of accumulation, then one enters the path of application or preparation. And so here these paths are nothing that is not some external path, some external road, but it's something in the mind. It is the gradual increase of experience and realization within the mind. So then in the path of application, there are 4 levels of development. They're called heat or warmth. Peak. The third one, patience, and the third one is the kind of the supreme level of that path. And so since we are all going to one day travel through these paths, it's important that we know about these paths, because in order to attain enlightenment, we have to travel through these paths.
Tene jolam tu shibanda kare chada yoresina tu shibanda pe ji ya yore pe de ngarang zu hin zu ba si hin ni ta na nga mo da yan sare ding sang ka cham chan thong do da chak ra cha ko ra chak ra la so ba da chak ji mi sa me thap ne so chak ji mi sa la tene hin dan hin ge hin da dan do de Then he hang the men junior manjong ngor da men junior la tanya because he hang the two cao hu jie. Then he call a me jie one da me dong yong wa zo kan se men bar yong wa. De ta jolam ke tena cholam ta thar sin san ne tene jolam la tlab de jolam ke darbo ta darati drug kapso tene ngarzo tere thonlang ke number ma to bi shi julam nam thonlang ke number ma to ba yi shi ji me ta de yi shi de me ta la ya na tene di me de ma chi phungor de koran la de 냠뇽 초와 나한테 지해서와 대 초와 지엔도 단들 초완들 하장 그 초와 농부 단다가 차니양 주신 조고 요리시 야나 그 뉴문바 담 차와 담지 식지 그 메타웨 차니양 조 되니 다른 조당만 보여를 돼 간달 디게 차니 주시 다야 바리스 통란 나버마도 비시게 메데 다지와라 하장 그 타니웨 살라 렙데바좀
So this heat, which is the first level of the path of application, it is just like when the old days when you try to make fire, you would take two pieces of wood and rub them against each other until there's fire. And so just before there is fire, there is great heat between these two pieces of wood. And then this heat leads to fire. So this heat of the path of application is just like that. So after one has completed the path of accumulation and one comes to the path of application, there is first this arising of this kind of heat. And the heat also is explained as like a pre-step to the path of seeing. So on the path of seeing, we can say the fire is already burning. And here it is called the fire, which is the non-conceptual primordial wisdom. And so just before the fire begins to burn, there is intense heat. So that is still on the path of application. So it is called heat because a very unique experience or kind of sensation arises, which is a very a kind of sharp experience, which is like heat. Or it is said that it's like the heat that burns away all the concepts and the afflictive emotions. So one has not yet realized the path of seeing, but this heat means that one has come very close to this path of seeing, where one realizes one actually sees the nature of the mind.
Dan de tsure in the Jirtang Khenpo Chadu yore da bu daveji ina bu nang davi ina perna da deni gomjane rongola deni tikchu da thugar da zokchi ina tikchu da thugala soba yore deni chaja chimbo ina chaja chimbo namjeri gala sabo gomne deni vimbal dendra gon dundha che ni somjia dendra dawa dendra mambol gomne deni inda tsur soso la nyam ji ywa de nyam nawa de deni soso ke gebshi ni den la yone deni tombol se ya shone deni de gang yba da jorang thonlang ke cholang ke toba ina cholang ke toba desa zal lapya perna cholang kap su timpa nya war ya ba ye na ne desa deso zal lapya se chang ngo to da jorang de gong rin do se e jolan na jolan tu ze mo zu ba chumjo nang ken da 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 ba lapya da jorang de gom yang gom de so la darong par chen ram ra yong ge yore de so la dozi la kare go de so ma ngo to ji de gom la na gom da de gom la chimre chuksam yor de so yorwa na tela soba ke tin songo tu na tin so ke de gom de nyam to de ya gong per royal ha jang gen jobo hue yong sarwa perna gegin lobda ke gegin tra nyam nyong ji deni lobjong ya bo yong kin to so ke loma lobti na de koran so lobjong yabu chaya. Yitzachan susuk hirabla rale le te yang jin la rale rwa. Ndra te tindi yonga doa kawaii na ya. Te ta jikpa. Te tanda tombar chisa yo na. Ta te ndara ngarang zun tene hien do yang da zo yang. Te kakwa susu ngarang zu susu la. Tanda kache gewe hini lamsang. Te ya tombar chisa ke koka mipa ina. Te susu la ko yo ra. O ta te jolam. Ru saya te ngene te ende sam susu la jien. O ta nga tara jolang ru la lepsha sam sa na oje. Ta ndra ke yong to go. Ta te ma lepna lepma da la ha ko to ne yang nyam ni nang go ra. Ti chanen da lam se ba de gom jang khin je ina lam ngapo modu ne ro sa mes. Lam ngapo du ne ro go wa na lam ngapo ha ma ona. Tene te karen ha ko ma son. Lam ngapo ha ma ona tene so kawala da ko ma ra.
So there's one important kind of tradition how this is practiced in Tibet. For example, when someone goes to meditate, for example, in the mountains and so on, and to retreat, again, Dzogchen, for example, they would practice Chekchu and Togal, or when they practice Mahamudra, they would practice the 4 yogas of Mahamudra and so on. So they go to meditate for several weeks or months and so on. And so as they meditate, their experience increases. And as it increases, then frequently that they regularly go to see their spiritual teacher, the guru, and they offer their realization to him. Basically, they report where they're at in their practice. So they're sharing their experiences, and then the guru determines, so you are now on the path of accumulation, or you have completed the path of accumulation. For example, you have reached the limits of the meditation on the 4 applications of mindfulness, and so next you should practice or meditate on this or that. And then you come back and have attained, you're in the path of application, and you have just transcended the step, which is the kind of called the peak, the 2nd step, and you're about to enter the lesser level of patience, which is the 3rd level of the path of accumulation. And then the guru says, and now you have to practice this, and at this point it's possible that certain obstacles will arise, and this is what you should do to avert these obstacles, and so on. So then one continues the practice, and one then enters the path of seeing, and the path of seeing has also a lesser, middling, and higher level, and so on. So in this way, as one keeps meditating, one's experience and realization increase. So if one practices in this way, by reporting and back and then practicing accordingly, then it is said that the experiences and realization develop quickly. And it's everywhere it's like that. For example, even in a school where a teacher work with the students in school, and then in order for the students to develop their knowledge, they report back to the teacher. So there is kind of this interaction between them. And of course, their development also depends on their wisdom. But also this kind of dialogue is a condition for the students' development. So it's anywhere you go, it's really the same. So it's a conducive condition to offer your realization to the teacher. And so sometimes it's the case that we don't have the opportunity to offer our realization or practice experience to the teacher. And then we have to see for ourselves, where am I at on the path? Am I on the path of application, the 1st level of heat? So one kind of can see, if one knows what should happen on those paths, then you know where you're at. And if you find that you don't have any of these experiences, then you have to continue to practice so you get to that level. So in the Buddhist path of meditation, And we are traversing those 4 paths. And there is no other paths to traverse. And so since we are all going through these 5 paths in our meditation, our practice, it's also good to know about like these 5 paths and what happens on these 5 paths. Otherwise, we don't know where we are at.
Alright, ta dira when tane tara jolam tru de ya toba ya na peren yinda ta kare tobi yungurusuna tene jolam zemo sirwanda la lagu yoreso. Zemo sirwanda tara tan doi kapsu yibyabi hyo yore. Tende zemo hibanda zunga ran yimi ba tang zimba ran yimi ba se ni yorwa. Tende zunga ran yimi ba zungu chunda da tamje ta ran yinji madra ba pachir nang zambo le tene ran yinji madra ba. Ta kandar sem zamri zamne sem ngobo le mande ba su zunga la tene shimba me ba chakpa me ba dangwa me ba ko ran yinji madra ba la sanang to sanang hibanda yang sar nang hibanda perna nyama na nyama te lakani chor kharn de tambo chareng si je kharo atini kale kalko nyama sarcha te ontini nyama chukar zo gora tin sanang hibanda sarcha zamri ma to tarong yong su zo ba ke nenga den roi to yomare kansa jolam hibanda susu je bo ke sarwa tarong papa sala lap to yomarwa den za zunga ran yimi bala sanang labanda dan di kapsu kare je he yore zunga da sa tamje ran yimi se na tomba ni se ko yoro amre ta tomba ni re da den ta tomba ni la tene zu ta ba lo je yong ko yore dan da la to ni la ma tra ba tomba ni la tra ne tene ta kare cha yong ko yore sina tomba ni la ta ni na hirap chong na phongwan jor so ne gombo lo ke tanda cha yong du ta tomba ni la ta ni win do kare re jiang me de ba jiang mo do tin ta teni da le jim re sa ma re che ngap sho yo sa ma re teni ta wa tham jin chun ba yo sa ma re tin ta ha chang ke che kun dap chen bo ri de tin de pe hie nang jiang go yo ro de tomba ni la ta ni che so ma che yang tomba ni la ta ni che de chen ta ro no ke yang yo ma re se sa da rang ro ro de ni
Kina ti cheta tingma de mara. Tini kiba khara yore.
Yore che de ke da ta tomba ni se lo ho ma do sam sang ro ji den
Legium de yomare, gewang up yomare, cheta ta mara.
다 동반 레줌데 요삼 요마레 다 동반이 세드 레줌데 미사 드라리 도텐자 다 동반이 야보 말이 있어요. 그로 제로
tini shemati cheta kiba.
이바 제데 다 레줌데 요마르 생합스 요마 간서 돈이라고 세양 거 이바라고 제로 제발만데
이난 legium de menda gewang up semata chikbarwa. 니가 대상거다.
다 믹사 대사 찍바라 선 동당 로아리도 제데다 해 용거요래 콕 레줌데 요고 삼데 요로와
탐보데
레줌데 미닛 딤파르트 바나 란신드 바 요고
고생바 교보다셔라
교도잖아 요고를 왔더니 때문 동반이 쓰는 미바리도 가와 연결이 삼산로 지선나 다니 제소
이니 제자티 코라 교보시다면도
이마데 담보네요 동반이 그 동바 히바데 파 앙글레 건도 상 당선로 게 그죠 요 말에 다 득바드나 니바요 말이지 동안용 거 말이 득바드나 가서 동반이라고 상야도
당부들이 손상거라
진 담보데가
레컴드면도 삼상거라
말에 다 동반이 리스나 레주네 마다가 상도 그러 동반이 가와인 그래시 동반이는 레전드 마다가 상 되더니 더 다 넘버나 연구 여러 로세닥 제데 스러 넘버 많이 발라요 따와는 여러
니바데
레전드 요 말이 세안도서 넘버 많이 따와는 여러
쳔바데 담보 넘버
짐바다 넘버 닌춘 여러 송도 동반이 세든고 고 단제 잡아자서 가는서 단고 잡아자 가서 시바데 닝아게 찌된 사람 죽진로 사람 닝아게 베진로 베노 고 잡아자 가서 베고 로여 저 형마다 봐 사미올란데서 말어
So then you reach the path of application, the first stage of heat, and then that realization increases and you reach the peak. And so that's explained, all of that is explained in detail in the sutras. And so on that level of peak, there is two ways of lack of existence or inherent existence. One is that the grasped at doesn't inherently exist, and then the grasping doesn't inherently exist. So the grasped at refers to the appearing phenomena that we grasp at, and they do not inherently exist because they are mere appearances. And same as it is within the mind. The grasping mind this grasping lacks inherent existence because it is a mere grasping at mere appearances. And so since the outer appearances lack inherent existence, then there also is no truly existing attachment or aversion and so on. So it all lacks any true existence. Everything is mere appearance. For example, and so then the one continues to practice that and clarity increases, which is just like the sun when it's first rising in the early morning. You see a little glimmer of the sun, then it slowly rises, and then you see the complete sun in all its brilliance. So the clarity the brilliance is the same, but in the beginning we just see an aspect, a fragment of it. And so that is because on the path of application, one is still an ordinary being, not a noble being. So here one recognizes that the grasped at and the grasping are naturally lack inherent existence, and that means that they're empty of self-nature. And so then one comes to the path of patience within the path of application. And so here one kind of begins to forbear without fear this nature of emptiness that one begins to fathom. So fearlessness with regard to emptiness. Nagarjuna had said when fear toward emptiness arises, it is due to a lesser degree of wisdom, and therefore it will become one's downfall. So there's two ways of looking at that from the perspective of not really grasping the empty nature, or so having fear of emptiness. One is the Buddhist way. It happens also to Shravakas and so on. So when they first see emptiness, then they see it more from an eternalistic kind of state of mind. And so until now, everything seemed to have really existed. And now they realize there isn't really any karma. And then maybe they would also think then there is nothing. There is no past and future births. There is no liberation. There is no attainment of enlightenment. So this kind of fear arises, wanting there to be karma and wanting there to be liberation and all-knowingness, but realizing that all of that actually doesn't exist. So it's more like you're kind of disappointed because you thought that this is what is, and then you find out that it isn't. So that's the one side to fear, and the other side is more the nihilistic side, which refers more to non-Buddhist views, where there is a kind of a right-out denial of karma to begin with. So there's not really that disappointment because one has not really ever believed in it. So one says there's no karma and there's no reincarnation, everything just doesn't exist, everything is empty, just like zero, like nothing at all. So there is no non-virtue that leads to suffering and so forth. So regarding the first one, it is the first one where one becomes kind of disappointed that all of that doesn't exist. It almost is so overwhelming to one's mind that it says that the feeling is like one's head is going to explode into many pieces.
다 춤초스 졸람 춤초 세른다반데 단 직딩이 비추는 그 초도 저바차데 요리 송동레 초도 저바 인고한데 통람 그 사미 그다 다 사바메바게 취탐제 지지게 닥진 차데 요레스 닥진 히반데 진들 망보 요르바 진 nga zam hia yori tin dak jin hi ba de korang ke chi thumong mai ba ke tela ro pa chi chi no ko yu ba ti cha de ne dak jin lo ko yor wa
Tak pa sana mi tak paran tak pa.
mari da pu chi
Tak po ki.
da pu chi pe na ngarang zo me ke zo pan thong de ko le yor zo tang de ni mai nang ke ta za tang de ni nam hi mang bo jin zom go yori de make korang na make wang bo summer meto jam tab sen make korang na na tene make wang bo ha jang ge hip dara de sab lan jamba summer ke meto si ba de tab ji yo la re make na de ke korang ke tumong mai ba ke ro pa chi na make de ke pa mi hi de yo lan ju pa la tumong mai ba ro pa chi ke yo re so ne de tab da dak jin si ba na dara 통람 그 사미 게다 대화제나리 사미 그 취탐제 제와라 토모마에 박진 지 미진 그 취제 임바차니 다네 춤초
Sagme gi chul kon tok ropak khara kya gutok.
사미 그 취다 제와 줄을 제스나 취 사미 그 네로 또발라 로바 믹사틱 지 노킨달라 직팀 취 임바간 힐라 데 코게 데라 토모마에 바로바시 베차니 춤초
Tini ko ropak yam khan disore pena. Ti takien sore pena ti kabla.
daktin
Pena so ti thonlang kabla.
jolang kapsuni
Tana de ti takien de.
jolang kaps ta tara kurang ti du zemo zu pa so ma nyamnyong ji kompern do so ta ko nyamnyong chen to hyu te cha de yora kurang
Mina takien ti kabla khara re ko ropak khara kya re. Ropak yam khan disore ti kabla.
to jolam chimchora
Ropak yam khan tholam chung re.
jolam chimcho ke
Kurang takien re.
kurang ke dakjin si re
Thonlam thongwa de thaya.
thonam ke samik chu
So then one reaches the highest level of the path of application, the supreme path of application. And so that this supreme path of application becomes like the conducive condition, the contributing condition that to realize it says first the untainted phenomena of the path of seeing. So there are different conditions in logic. It speaks about 5 different conditions. One of them is called the contributing condition. Contributing because it kind of is conducive. It kind of helps to lead to a certain level. So here it leads to the level of the path of seeing. So conducive or contributing factor. Also, for example, when we see a form with our eye consciousness, then so you need many different conditions that have to come together for you to see the form. And the eye sense power becomes like the conducive condition, or like the contributing condition to see form. And then when the consciousness enters the object of sight and so on. And so in any case here, in this case, when one's realization increases on the path of application and one reaches the supreme path of application, then the supreme path of application itself becomes the contributing condition, or the contributing factor for one to enter the lower stage of the path of seeing.
onda de so tam je tene do e kaps je tumong de kanda sung ko yo me ti ko re tene dan de so nyamnyong de so tene so so la jen de da so so ke so so ha ko ton na Te yapo yore tene san shubayin Jikten dalan drewa yo de bari de drewa jan de tene tang ha ga kapso yang sa chyo kor de jila yong gare long an de long a jalan da jolam da so cholam jolam shiba yewan de dan do nga ni chebar te sang chenpo mi na yang tang ha kapso zo za da long tam je la ra le ba zo ti jan ni song yong go yorwa den du yang Perna jolam tu shiba tawalan sona tene yang kam dubala tine jeke yore sungdoa
Kadlo tene.
kam dubala kam
Duba sanach.
kam se luchi tangma yora
Duba nyam dok lama. Itana.
kam duba zu kam zag zane cheparji tandala kam chando yongwa kam chando yongdu tene tu jewa tene la kam de tenda ga zane cheparji ndala chando la tene namba somjam sunggo yore kahe yang di lemtro legwang le ta jiwang ma le sagya la soba ta tene ta kantar che samre ta chalam ra la tin pathoni sar ta kamdo yo wachik
Chapelam.
chalam ke ta nyamni jiman tene yang kamdo wanchik de gareresina lama la mugu chedin jen den sosu ju la mugu ha jang ke chede den ba per na malare ba mar ba la mugu yo ba na yi da na ke mugu to ne den ye lam sin la sen man jo ne ti to ni yang kam de de za ne che bar jin ji yo ro wa ti ka la za ndo na den ne da ra jo lam ju ke to ba che dang je den ne je den sosu ke zungzhi le din da 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 wa da chi lob jong jin o da da kan ra ko da ra se lob nyer ya bo ji lob nyer je se de so zo go de da ko jong dar jin da nyam li ji la ko wa cha ya ji de na jin de ni kam da de ni de so le din da ding jin jin jo lang ge ding jin la so ba tam ji je wa da na song ko yo ren ha ka su
And so this is how it is commonly taught in the sutras. And so there's much more commentary on that, but I thought it would be good to know about these experiences, so I'll give a brief outline. And in the Tantric teachings, we also speak about the 10 bhumis, which we will come to later. But also, the Tantric teachings speak about the 5 paths, and it's more less there is no difference, but in the Tantric path, it is explained on the basis of the channels and the winds. So when the experience of heat in the path of application is described, it is described from the perspective of the channels and the winds, on how the channels and winds kind of gathering the elements within the body. And there's 3 different ways that, so gathering in the elements, in other words, means the experience of heat arises. So this realization of heat on the path of application arises. So there's basically 3 ways in which the subtle elements gather, or the heat of the path of application arises. One is by the force of karma. That is, one has created the karmic action, one has engaged in practice. Chakpelam sana ducha kilang re. Chaklam.
chalam no
Ducha kilang ra.
la te nga la hyun dna nang ke
Ina
yo
chakpa kilang ra. Chakpa tangwa kilang. Nga tsik ti hako re. Chaka sa. So it's the path of where desire is utilized as a practice. Second is where one cultivates true devotion to the Guru, for example, as in the case of Milarepa and Marba, and in that way the blessings are absorbed, and this is then how the elements kind of subtle elements gather in the channels and so on, which basically again means the attainment of the heat on the path of application. And then the third one is through diligence. So when one is very diligent in the study, first one wants to know all about it, one learns, and then one trains, one practices until one reaches samadhi, what is path of application.
Ta zuba shibanda dane gadu jeyori sena nga yigya vidu lungsam umalanda ne lungsam za womanan zundu dane tomba ga nawa hyandu tomba nawa dal din zuta bandala zubas nanda malare bak song yo ate yangsi hyusin ba yin malare bak chimo ge tun de cha zhou le gun de nyamlin ji si ni ma do si song do de chimo gonda ni da Kyobpa ma re ge de cha zhou le gu si de nyamlin ji song ne kong ge be yun da tam je la dan ba nang do de nang de ne je ga re yo re si na Kyobpa da na si ma si gang de la de ni chorang ge da lu ge to ni de ji song yo re ma nga zo lu ge le choksang le ge choksang ne da de na jin ne za da longsam za wo man ne zhe de ge yo re song de ne chorang dong bu ge na wan de ran yin ge xia ge ri song ne ma la re ba song de wa de de zang ran zu ma la re ba ge jim zhang yin zang de ne de ge dong an ni de xie ge ba jo lam de so ko la dong nang nang go yo re 다 간다를 롱선 오마나 전도 동족이야 동족이야데 동족들 해메온 주다 바들라 주바 생각갑스
류쪽 상사나
다 trucker 류가 trucker도 돼서 난 거라
So then there is the patience on this level of application, and how it is explained in a tantric path is on that level the mind winds enter the central channel, and when they enter the central channel, then an experience of emptiness arises, and one will be able to sustain patience. So one will not be afraid when emptiness arises. So there's a teaching by Milarepa that he gave to his some of his patrons. And so in one of them he said that you have to practice dividing so the night sessions, or the kind of the periods of the night are divided into 6. There's 6 periods of the night, and one of them is early in the morning when it's not yet light outside. One should practice with one's body the yogic exercises, and these yogic exercises are conducive for the mind wind to enter into the central channel, and then the experience of emptiness will arise. And so being followers of Milarepa, it is also important that we pay some interest, some attention to that, on how then, according to the Tantras now, this path of application is explained, and also according to the Sutra path. And so when the wind mind enters into the central channel, an experience of emptiness arises, and then there is no fear of this emptiness. And so that is, according to the Tantric path, called the level of patience in the path of application.
테네다 나가 값스 제모 히반데 다 제모 히반데 두그 용딘 도보찬이 제모 주는 소요라 지당 데 두그 용딘 도 히반데 조 치휴데 가라인사 리드 요르시 와이나 간터 캄드 종아랑 조 가긴 죽도 감 요르와 데캄 카레캄 데 가긴 양년 되는 가서 르르데 당마 감 요르와
가시
gabgin nyamni chin te tara gabgi da mixaten songko yo mar ngete hak ko ya chun du chine te kham ji ban de 다 간다 다라딩 아주 대차도요리 두증아데 자와랭알라지 되는 조왕아게 롱아 요르와 조왕아 롱아데 용알라지네 되는 야염 뇨버ጆ바 소소가 양 짜든라 짜네 체버지나 야염 데처 뇽족게더라 게 냠니 나운두 되는 디게 팀더게 다티 팀더 왕게 다라데 컴데니 컴데야 자 로장니 주네 야드니 나이쯤어 봐도 야도네 야로바 다 드소samla 드소라 요거요다 나갑서 가서 제모 히바
감세나 틱레라 그래 디갑라
라
틱레라 디니 나게 제모로도 되네
다 로장니네 나 제모라 안도 제모 시 용거도 데니
나게 제모
야도 터요라
나게 제모라 라
나 제모라 다 다한 시보 차선
시보 시라면도 틱레 된서 나게 제모란 로야 인나 로라 디니 제모 랩차드
마레 로장니를 되네 로장니 주니 야다 디캄도 야 나 제모 봐도 야 도트바 다히 르나 야비엄 짝도는 뇽버죠 바게 뇽조 띵인 진검송아
나게 제파도 도토바
야 도트바
So, and then according to the Tantric system, how it explains the peak, so that is when one has realized the qualities of heat, then one comes to the level of peak. And so here it is related to the arising of the four joys when we practice with the channels, winds, and the drops. And so in general, then in those teachings, it is said that the 5 nectars are the 5 dhyani Buddhas, and the 5 elements are the 5 female Buddhas. The 5 elements and also wind are the 5 female Buddhas. And so in any case, then when the male and the female are in union and practice, then through the interdependence of that union, the drops, the subtle essence drop, are reversed. And so it is said that through the power of the left and the right channels, they can be reversed from the point of union up until the tip of one's nose. And so that tip is like a peak, and so therefore it is called the peak.
다 드니 당하 갑서 춤초 휴바이나 드니 다 다히 강나 다 초람라서 다 존람 글랑 오마 탐지 갑서 제더 세다양 자롱라서 제더 냠린 제나양 르라 삭제 근자바 요데바 당 셈라 똑제 근자바 요데바 또바 남도 근자바 요데바 인두 다 춤초 갑서 드니 다 사미 이게 단다그 추 망보제 용디 망보제 조 용고 요장 조 히바자 창우 동르와 소소라요 마미바 차르사르다 단다 지 용고 요바 디찬에다 단다 송고 요다 너서 조 치휴데 소소 냠뇽 냠뇽데 야 공데 양 ፐ네 디찬에 단조 용고 요바레 텐데서 서르점 휴바엔다 텔레파망나 하장가 mambo 휴야 요바당 테네데서라 이당데 서만다 mambo 요바리데 데 테란 서르점제 휴바레스
And so then how the Tantric path explains the highest point, the supreme point of the path of application. So the kind of cholam olayoris.
cholam dang jolam la do zema zuba chumcho yedo dina ge chumcho go mayin patanje lam wo ma cha de yoro.
So I can read my own writing sometimes. So the highest point it's given that name supreme because everything it's superior to everything that comes before it, which refers to all the other stages of the path of application and all the path of accumulation. So here, one continues to practice the channels, winds, and drops in an authentic way, and in this way, then an experience of undefiled bliss is experienced in the body, and also within one's mind, experience and realization develop to this kind of supreme state of bliss. And so within that state, all undefiled, it has all the undefiled, the qualities of all undefiled phenomena become completed within that state. And so kind of a new experience that hasn't been there before arises. So mainly here, basically the experience that one has gained before continues to increase. And so regarding that, there is just much more to be said, actually, just giving a brief outline, and also in terms of all the other commentaries, it's also explained in many different ways.
Oh, yeah, that Gang Daryans, the Tarba Chamtu Namba Mayan Balayore, Sumande, then Korang, Tse Korang Tony Hako Goya de Garerisina. That's Solam Yilanga Siori Solanga. Dinang Gepena, that's Sosuji Wugab Chutrum Sumaji, Yorova Chutrum Suman Dang. Then you Wambunga, Go Namya Dang. Then you Sage Tsu Simba. Then you that Jimba the Higin Dimbo Tony, Zage the Neba. Della Sobaga, that's all Jim Koala Jua, Jiwan, then Della Sobake, Tony Giva Drabande, Nama Maimbala, Yuba Inza, Tarbacham to Yuri, Tarbande, Young Delia, Della da, Jit Roarsibake, Lam Chahetana, Yo de Baje, did a chat to my Yo de Baje.
Namba Maimba. Namba Maimba.
Namba Maimba.
So, and liberation, conducive to liberation. So how we should understand this term is that now in the path of application, there are, for example, 5 branches, and these are conducive to liberation, implying that these elements of practice are also present in non-Buddhist traditions. So, because here we're still in the context of an ordinary person, so one practices, for example, ethical discipline, or one constrains one's 5 sense doors, or one eats in moderation, or one practices mindfulness and alertness, abides single-pointedly, and cultivates disenchantment with samsara and so on. So these are all virtues and activities that are also present in non-Buddhist tradition. So that's why these are elements conducive to liberation.
Oh, yeah, that the other Dorji song Chukchik Bade. Dom Dan Hingje Sur Palang Yu Song. That Dom Shibade Naranzo Megewa Tamjin Sur Dom Yung Barwa. Lunga Yisan Pa. Ducha Hidan Tumogwanga Pantron Roaten, Surka Yundu, del Surdomsi. Tane Domba Dikala, Ninja Sebandeon, Matepala Yubari song. Not that song going the young, Mateba Sena, Mambo Jake, or that Dukja Huge Inkdo, Gimme Dimi Inkdo, some young, some Dokimambo Yorova. That our Mari song called. That Jikten Sumgön, that Gumba, the Yavin, the Naranson, Merchant, Sona, Hachang, Trambo Chanya, Jason was a Chayong Yori. Trambo Chanya, Son you want Dele Yanche, Halam Tsuba, no Jane, De Yosari, Insari, Song Yaba Mayan, and Jikten Sumgön, Katara, Sen Nang Sang Song, subject to Sort Jiba and Hajang Tendo. Ngaransun Jidang Pechawa Tamje, the Tehir, Tuja Chimbos. Tuja Chimbos, a Hajangache Tuba Tola Hajangache Zola Zowa shukchimbo nang yo ba ke namba yo re de jagan phabu yo ne drumta to so chik song de teni bu ganjing ge yong ge drumta teni yinda ba yo min dang zi dang dan de la so ba ne char jiting ge che ringen do so tam je ni char ta de ang char sung der we na kong tim der tar sin sho go yan de che tim der je yong ba la ta cha he re ne kar che tung je gong de yo ro ba kar che tung je cha de yo re per na medo je go yo na ko la teni jo mambo je chang go ba ta jo chang wa zam je go ma chu ba jin par che per na sa shu tam je ge ti sang de do so na me do ya jin ma ta ba yin do de so tam je ya ga re rin do se hip cha je song yong ge de de ngaran so gan da la je tu sam je ji top so wa yin na de ngaran so tu ja dang thong ja de ja cheren ro wa la 통 투자 신다 넘버 추 다다르라 넘버 지보 말아 다르고 돌 투자는 자체 다르돌 투자 자체는 인도 제당 출력 리미스 반다 더돈 처용 거 사리 마도 투자 중초이나 출력 리미스 반다 깔래 가보 사리 소수대 야보인 산대와 마도 인 독자래 마도 진 더요 말아 때 이인나 가렌도 루차 가렌도 따는데 대안도와 싸움데 지수 이랑 지고와 망보지 차용 거요. 될때는 되네랑 인게데 인라야 zigor지 더 차용 거로.
So then Vajra statement number 11 says that the non-Buddhists also guard vows and have compassion, because there are some who say that non-Buddhists don't have vows and compassion at all. So having vows means that one restrains oneself from negative action, one restrains one's body, speech, and mind from pursuing those tendencies of attachment, aversion, and ignorance. So such pursuing is restraint. So that is kind of having a vow. And compassion, so that's something that non-Buddhists have. And then compassion is something that non-Buddhists also have. Because some people might think that these Tirthikas or non-Buddhist philosophers and so on, they're so bad, they deny virtue and non-virtue and so on. But actually, this is not the case, and this is what Jikten Sumgön is trying to say here. And Jikten Sumgön's intent in general is a very truthful, very honest, very straightforward. And it is very kind of conclusive, that there is no thought of it's probably how it is and so on. It's pretty certain. So Jikten Sumgön's work consists of the outer, inner, and secret profound dharmas of Jikten Sumgön, which are very extensive. And those who study the scriptures can have studied these in a vast way, and then gain strong learning, knowledge of these scriptures. And just in general, this has been done by there's various different tenet systems and things to learn, such as the tenet systems that come from the old India, and then the tenet systems that come from Tibet, and then also some worldly fields of knowledge, such as medicine or astrology and so on. And so there are many who have kind of really brought all that kind of learning to perfection, the worldly and the Dharma knowledge together. And that is actually very important, to know all of these aspects of Dharma practice, or in general aspects of knowledge. So because everything is kind of interdependent. For example, if one wants to grow a flower, then first of all, the seed itself needs all kinds of conditions complete in order to grow. But even if those are complete, then there are other conditions, obstacles that could cause it not to grow anyways, such as a bird may come and destroy the seed and so on. And then the flower won't grow. So it's just like that. It's good to have a kind of a vast field of knowledge. If one learns much, then one will know much, and one's view becomes really vast. And this is also where then non-sectarianism in terms of different religions and so on comes about. It comes from such vast knowledge. If one doesn't have vast knowledge, then one is more likely to be sectarian. One then just thinks mine is just the best and the others has got to be wrong. But if one also learns about the others and looks at their teachings and so on, then one will find that they also have a lot of good elements, good practices, and then one rejoices. And so in this way, this is where also a respect toward others comes about.
This on the pen the number my but the Sutram Kandav Sungri. So Juba la Zabzajin and Zumuk and Zumuk Zela Druvatan. Druv. So Juba la Zabzajit. Tande Sanjake and Jidanti Tarati Casersin, Sanzi and Tigger Druver and Jibari, and Mambo, Chanin Rao Mambo Yorba. Sanjela Yoran Casersin. Then and the Kid Diamati cups. Then Matujilla. Comba Jadio, Lanon Jizum. The dark, then Nambala Yuri, Sir Marjabala Yuri, Druvatane. Tara Kamdalan Zumos on Zumuk Zelayang, Druvatane. Carson Mantons and Basse Yugri, Simji say Yugri, the Nazabzabia. And it church on the Daz and around and that is Ranjink Church, Dami into Tong Yorite. The solar at your lean down party, they are mina, then a cock at second na chumatonga. Matable Tanday or Sonda? Chul. Chut to solar check Palin, they are no, Pajang Mo and our Tanchina Nangajura, Chutongona.
Getting a lane to cut.
Chut, the suture is that Dayuk Churva.
Tabuchula.
Tabu Buchurva. Matsuchurva. Double me Parangoli, but that's a retomala choyo, but so young. Party lean to Tejumina.
That's hung double.
Pa Limbate, go Chanogri, and then causes Zabzaj Chotongaris. Hajakako.
So,
that was number of my impotent that I heard. Tenida do chag and you will correct. Long doers stuff, pay long. Chakba mat the Biakchit. Long de was a matching a hepe, Kambangoyachi Pokal, Compajan Ron. Kambangoyakala.
Kabachigla.
Kambachikalan Ron.
Did it come back?
Kambangoya come there.
Did it go to
Rote. Chom the Vajra. The Yamana Tikala Kambangoya Chipoka, Lang. Kompa Majana, Kambangoyaka, Yalang. Not there, Karsina, Mate. Tam Masamu Jubuke Chapat so Doyakchit. Then it that not so that Jikpa Tomori, the Naji Banda. June that the Mazas is an eta, not Pati and Cook, Mexicorana, then Kani, Kejat Hin. The Tabakatine, Dom Siban, the Matipalayan, the Tab Yori Sondoa.
And so, for example, how do non-Buddhists practice discipline or ethical discipline of taking vows? For example, they attach. So, in order to not to kill sentient beings, they attach like little bells on like their finger or on their walking sticks. Because there's many animals that they don't see that could be killed. So maybe to make them go away, they attach those bells, or to restrain themselves from stealing. For example, when they drink water that is unowned water, for example, river water is said to be unowned. So if they would just go to the river and drink that water, they would feel that they're stealing. And so then unless they have something to give, they would feel that they're stealing. And so basically they just wouldn't drink that water. And then as an antidote to desire or attachment, they would practice all sorts of physical hardships, like like standing and never sitting or lying down for extended periods of time, or even like bending one of their legs and standing on one leg, and sometimes even when walking, walking on one leg, basically jumping and having the other leg like bent in. And that, they say, would be an antidote to one's attachment to desirables. And then one thing that they practice also in common with Buddhists is the observance of silence, but they take it to that level where they want to be careful not to tell anything that is untrue, any lie, that they spend their entire life like saying nothing at all. So there are certain practices of austerity or vow holding or kind of discipline that you find in the non-Buddhist traditions.
Tene ta tomok la ta zabza ji inde tene kaze pawa sudu kaze pawa de so tamche namba la yore sura la yore ta de so Jikten Sumgön tene gang la Gong Chik chomjen song song mate pa la give dribza mang song de enza mate pa ina ya tene namba ta tung chur de ba da gewa mang bo yore de chama tene sanje ge de yang tena ge gewa khahe metek bala yupa chi ne te yin no song ne tene sanje ge ma namba ke ta nyamni nango song ya ba yore de so sepje ji ang de so te metek bala yupa re namba ma yin bala yore nda dambo tene sis namba nyamni nang ke yore nda 다 이나 양달라 하고고야 같이인제 가려요래 오나다 단다게 돈바도서 마데발라요 남바마인 발라요나 되네 다 소탈 그 돈바시바데 요리다 마리세 진더 저와침보지 자그 요르바 단달은 Jikten Sumgön 카시보 송용 거요래 소탈 시반데 자그 요 말에서 마차브 줌신데 소탈라 님종 지신고 여러와 님종 지신 시바데 님종 시바데 니버도 고완된 타고 상약 선는데 되니 대점 작요 말이와 응아제 공방 충청직 탑르고 상양다고 대점 그마도게 양 따베잖아 대점이야 통보래야 로야 대스갑래 대 ngaran so nambung ne ta yong wa ina tan de ta wa thom bu kala sam na tong ke me ba ta ra jin sa re yang koran so rang ge yong ge thon sam ta wa ina de che kar chi ma zi ba ya yin si ba ro
Rang se na
koran so ta wa
so namba ma
yin ba
Ding
do je chang kon pa tu je yo re se na do de do che ta ta bu da sta de ma je ya ra
major die top gona tini chat tini tawa thombo ke kecha khare tawa thombo ke kecha
turang ta debo no zo ja sa ro den ro ri da ma so ga ta sanje ko ma ta ba da ro khozo sanje ko ma do ko me do ti ngarang sumene oda ngarang sum da sanje ko ma do de te za chen bo da cha yo ma ro da
Koran so tawa de
다 그런 스타와 자치모 말이 지나데 오는 거 하나를 찾아다 민종 그 뜻인 더 말지다
말해 건조 아간세나 상계 거본 덤겨 말아
민종 다 뜻인 요 말이 라기는데 대치보 저죠 민종 뜻인 요 말이
낭바마인 바 And so also when they are, in order to be careful not to fall into ignorance, for example, they are not eating after midday, which is also a common practice in Buddhism. So here we're speaking about non-Buddhists. And in a previous Vajra statement, Jikten Sumgön has said that the Tirthikas and non-Buddhists have also many virtuous practices. And there's many virtuous practices that they have in common with Buddhist practices. And then there is some that they don't have in common. So basically what is important for us to understand is restraint here, or having a vow. For example, in the pratimoksha, or individual liberation. One may wonder if though they kind of the non-Buddhist practitioners are without that, or kind of with that. And so they have some elements of that, but not according to how it is actually taught in the individual liberation. So the individual liberation, the main point here, the main quality to attain is renunciation. And renunciation literally means to have a definite wish to emerge from samsara. So a definite emergence is a literal meaning. So as Buddhists, when we cultivate renunciation, then the intention is that we want to attain the state of enlightenment. That's why we cultivate renunciation. And so from the perspective of non-Buddhist philosophers, since their idea of enlightenment might be different, that is why it is said that they do not have that kind of renunciation.
Tene namba la ya ninje yore ha jang ninje chimbo yore dan de ni teni pe dang je ba tyu sin simba yimba tene gang re la me du ne njal la phen ne namba ma yimba tan ra tene jazin ke trupa chen ne che che le trupa chen ne me tro de tene gang re de ha jang ke dramo chak ba yin za me tro che len de song me che la de wan de la yang tene Jazin ke cheche le turne, tene din tana trompo yosa je le tur de chet. Tene jazin tana penne, maje le turn, churang ti chet kala dena, drama ki mari chet pa lang labde, tene kok chet pa lang mudawa, de tabo ke ninje yores.
Nang ba mayim ba yanara. Takas kangre rinpo chimara. Kangre ra.
Kangre la desin.
Kangre rinpo chimara.
Kangre rinpo jinsar, kangre rinpo jinte sanang
neko sona sona.
Neko sona. Koran su tumong ke de nere ra.
Kangre rinpo chinga la na cho ra.
Kang rinpo chi. Kang desi na.
Kang rinpo chi.
Ana desi na jinga.
Desi Kang desi.
Ana ndo desi. Tina mde.
Tuya. Ahorita. La mi ngo.
Go la de.
Mi go shisa mi chonzare mi go shiso. La go dog.
Ana dun la.
Ore. Ana.
Tani gam da jo la kyuten chuten jo. De van ra na sa.
And so then also the second point is they also have compassion. So non-Buddhists also have compassion, great compassion, just like Buddhists have great compassion. So there's this one story where 10 non-Buddhists went on a pilgrimage to Tise, and 9 of them died from the icy wind. And so then it says they were tested by Indra. So then one of them survived, and so then Indra appeared to that one, and he said that there was this kind of seat, this high seat. There was a dog on that seat, and then Indra said to that person, "If you sit on that seat, you will not freeze to death. You just have to take the dog down." But then that person, who was a non-Buddhist, had too much compassion for the dog, so he wouldn't take the dog down.
Das nang ba yin yang, ngarang so yin yang. Ninje yo ba yi jigla, ninje chemi hiban de ha jang je kala ka bo cha de yores. Ninje kare yore o ma jig de ka nga hyu nyang o ninje san yan de yore. De ha jang hyuk chen bo. Yo ba zang ma je hyuk chen bo. 단 ninje chemi hiban de ka ni yong go yores na. Simjin Tsemi Bala Mectona, Ninja Tsemi Yin Chang Yoris. Tsemi Hiband. Taib Simjin the Datamji. Then Donghak Jamsole Jarsho, Sayan Dek Sanonde, Ninja Tsemi child. Then the Ninja Tsemi in the Getang Ninja Yoba Zamja Hajange Zambo Yabori. Then Ninja Tsemi Hibadanko, the Sanje Sanji, Naranso Sanji and Dokoyora. Sangje barla dan duba yorwa gongpon tabyal then the sangje tobya ge jola pha ko ro jola ta nye cha ge nye jo ro la borda ta nye cha ge jo cha de yore ma to chirtang da ningje siban de ngune ta ne ngaran so je ningje siban de ta ta chirtang yore la fakpar de di yoba dek zam ge then Semne de Yabamaimba, Ninja de Gone, Gondia, Bergoa de Garchimbo Chad Yuris. Naranzo Lama gave Hini in a young Ninja tang Janchok Semina. Then young Tawa Wus and Tobochi here, young Lobjong Yusi, Mambochi here, then a young. The yin tortomato tampapaya, so rangoni, te some young toko yomare, Gangante and dute, Tikangate, that tortoko yomarwa. There in the Chamba tang Ninja Sevande, Kachi Donchiri. Flapper the Ninja Sevan and Samsa Tetrino. Ninja Sevande, Zuba Sevandeni Jala Za Chimbo J. Tazik kan chaling go yo ban dang yin ro ri do je ka le ka bu ji ring do ri ning je dang ta ze yo ra ze sing gen ro je ram na je jo cha chim bo ji yo na ta te lin ro go na le la bo lin tho go ma ro ka yin sin sing ge sa ro sin cho wa yo di na yi pen zu ba je gong go na ta ma je control la on yung de lang yo ra nga nga ma ji control huge lang da ma de zuba gong na le la bo huge rim do Jikten da di ma de la zuba ja la gar si zuba na go ma da na nin ji ji go yo na ayang de we ka le ka bo jin do de yin za de da da ji ka le ka hyu ge na ba ni cha de yo re da la zuba hi ban da nin ji hi ban da ni de yin za de nin ji de ji ka le ka bo yin na yang ngaran so ke nindin chi go yore sitanila
Gina soba da ninja ke phala tarang ninja kale kharwa
zuba da ninje bal da ninje des le la ro
lelare
des le la sara zuba la yang da namba mambo yoro da zuba ka hela tuna de ninje des le ka na ka hela tuna da des le la
tanga le la ra
ma che ngal tsini ji de ona lamsang o nga zuba gong ku tin gong ka le khabo do I dini ninje ji de o ninje ko tro yi wan hyor song san na de sta ga yoro
and so within Buddhism so we practice compassion but so there is the ordinary compassion but there's also the immeasurable compassion which is the one that's very difficult to cultivate because it is a very powerful compassion. And so immeasurable compassion arises when one has in mind all sentient beings, immeasurable sentient beings. When one has in mind immeasurable sentient beings, then immeasurable compassion will naturally arise. So it is that wish wishes to liberate limitless sentient beings from the ocean of suffering. So that's immeasurable compassion. So we have compassion, but it needs to become immeasurable compassion, because what we wish is to attain enlightenment, and compassion becomes the cause that makes one come closer to enlightenment. So in general, there is compassion, but it needs to be increased more and more, so it becomes immeasurable compassion. So, for example, if you have a lama who doesn't have such compassion or bodhicitta, he might have a very high view or a lot of learning and so on. But if he doesn't have this immeasurable compassion, then he will not be able to liberate others. And he will also actually not be able to liberate himself from his own difficulties. So love and compassion really are most important. And so also that is what I'm sometimes thinking. What's really most difficult to cultivate is compassion and patience. For example, to illustrate the difficulty, if you lost a precious object and then you find it in the lap of a lion or a tiger, it's not easy to get it back. So it's just like that with cultivating patience. It's not so easy to cultivate patience if like you're really angry at somebody and so on. And so then the same is true for compassion, although it is slightly easier to cultivate compassion still than it is to cultivate patience. So because basically those two, patience and compassion, are the most difficult qualities, and that is why we have to make a greater effort in cultivating them. So to show how it's easier to cultivate compassion and patience, for example, if somebody insults me, then it's very difficult to practice patience with that person. But it's easier to cultivate compassion because at least we can think that this being is just controlled by their delusion, the delusion in their mind, so then we can feel compassion for that.
Ta ninje de tomar machi ba jibar sibala de ganza Jikten ni tsola main ninje de gongo ya de karchimbo risha. Den za de ngazo chanchang ne je minkang dang ran nan rona ya pu no samdo kansin ma dongha ji mambo tongri de ni ninje je de ni yangse ninje jendu yang pa de la gom ne de gom du lo de ya ramji narsung ya yarjen ro ba yang jun bo hyu de ga na yang ji chan de cha mi ba ro cha ne ji ninje ji ya mi jong ro xin na mi jang ro cha ro ya yo ro ba ta yang tong mai lun tong shin ji ne
min kan la mambo chi yang min kan la mambo
min kan dan ne ba ha jan za ji mambo tong de na ko zhe yang chwa me ba cha ro ra de ya ma yin ba nga so lo de ne ji zab zam ro ji ne ya je dang go do zhen so yin na nge de sam che den rei yu me ha ko ma son choran zi zhe da de chan chan min kan na ye lun ro gang a yo ba so sang na da ne de ne ni ji de ya je dang go do de so so ge pa ma tam ji le sang na da ne ni ji ya je dang ge de tar to da ni ji ran xin ba ma yin ba ni ji ne che mi ba sim jing tam ji ji de guan dan na ya bon dos.
So when we cultivate compassion, it's important to begin just on just with like one or two people around you, and then you're expanding that. And for example, also sometimes I think it may be good to go to a hospital, because there you can see a lot of suffering beings. And when you see them, compassion arises. And then you keep reflecting on that, and it becomes stronger and stronger, and until ultimately it becomes really boundless. But then we should also exercise caution when we go to a hospital to cultivate compassion. Maybe we shouldn't stay too long, and because sometimes when we first see something, the mind is more shocked and compassion arises. But then when we stay too long and we see suffering all the time, we become kind of desensitized to the suffering, and then if the feelings just are shut out, and then we don't feel anything anymore. So we might have to exercise some caution when it comes to training our mind. So you have to be also gentle when we train the mind. So you can sometimes go to a hospital, and then sometimes just think about other things like your parents and so on, and expand your compassion that way. So ultimately it becomes vast compassion for all sentient beings.
Zuba Sirvande on the Rariya. Nan some satir Shanti Deva Gatara Zuba level Shake Yorva. Take him on the church Huduni, Lodgeron Jeduni, Toano, the Gisonde. Courageous. The Ranam Mambo, Courageous song, there was some of Sinto. So, Diana with the moon de Pinto Chimbo Huge. Zuba Gom Shiba, the Kato Long Logic Jan and Raven, Donatin, Gangan Jane, Lamsang Zuba Gong and Pekalakabo. The Lamsang Zuba Gom Hajan Kalakabo. That has Junjo Zuba level there. Tola Dan Nam Rang Dang, Be Dang, that Mambo, just on that, and I show you on the summer down the day. That show Jachimbo, to get some of the Mambo Tsarayondu. Then Zuba going out there, take Hamani, trapping to this Yodeba. Their Pinto Chimbo Sari Samsta. Cantatarang Canelaba in the Lanin Tarto, Calacabo, Choranzo Calter, the Lanin Tarto, Reva use. Then the Ninja and the Gomba Layang Jibari. What's is some and Mambo, J. Soy on the sum of drum ravaging, sir. Jigorms lower the Ninja Jagos and Lelaborim. The Ninja Kemsachi son and de Kemsa Sarva. Mana can you singing time Ninja, Sikanzachi Kangate Delana, Ninja made the John Horisona. Then Tahin Ninja said. Simjin Tamjil, Ninja and Ninja Garacha Somare, Dunja, Lotopaga Pa Zuna, Jizu de Warimado, Den of Charda,
Loguzuri.
Lok Pa Zun, Simjin Tamji, Lok Pa Zu, then Telachi, Dodo, Donja Tola Ninja de Wandomado, Dunk told Son Ninja that answered so at Jim Matabatano. In the Rarimas on Bada Karchimo injuries.
And so, regarding the cultivation of patience, for example, like nowadays I'm also teaching on the chapter of patience of Shantideva, but in the past when I myself was learning about that, when we were studying the chapter on patience by Shantideva, at that time, sometimes I would ask myself, why all these lists and all these enumerations and so on. But now I feel that they are also of great benefit, because when it comes down to it, when it comes down to be patient with something, it's very difficult to just be patient in the moment, in a more direct way. And so when we go through the Bodhicharya Vatara's chapter of patience, for example, and if we go through all these lists and enumerations and metaphors and so on, then as we go through all of these, we think about it. So we think more and more about patience. And in this way, that kind of thinking becomes like a preparation for the time when we actually have to practice patience. So I'm not saying that I'm actually personally putting all of that directly into practice, but I hope that you will be able to do so. And it's the same with compassion. Also, compassion arises kind of as a result of having thought about it in many different ways. So all of these many different ways of thinking coming together then enable one to be compassionate. But it's also difficult to be compassionate just like that in the moment when it comes down to it. So, for example, one thing that's a little strange about compassion is that when we recite this kind of abstract prayer of all mother sentient beings, limitless space, and so on, then it seems that we feel so much compassion for all these kind of abstract sentient beings. And then when we meet somebody who is actually having a hard time, then we just feel nothing at all, and we feel no compassion at all. And so then when we just recite, in this case, if the recitation of all mother sentient beings and so on, this is like an artificial, created, like a concept of compassion that we create with our intellect while we recite this. But it's not actual compassion. So we have to be also careful not to be like that.
Oh, thank you very much. Oh, Zunam de Tomje Zebani, Tovani Verdana, Panzine, Jigan, Balan, Joba, Subhan Zolan, Joa, Jo, Chanjo, Sunjo, Ramboje, Maje, Banan, Jijir, Jiban, Yamba, Meba, Gune, Gondan, Bewa, Jo. But then one much. May every being ailing with disease be freed at once from every malady. May all sickness that afflicts the living be instantly and permanently healed. Thank you very much.